Happy New Year, everyone! For the past few months, I've been exclusively talking about animals that you probably shouldn't have in your home. But that doesn't mean there aren't any oddballs that you could. Welcome back to Sketchbook Biology. Today, we're traveling no further than my living room to visit an avocado that spends nearly all of its time buried under 6 inches of dirt. This particular avocado has a name. Trevor. I don't get to see Trevor as often as I'd like, but when he's ready to present himself, he will usually poke his little head out of the dirt. Which happens at least once a month. This lets me know that Mr. Man is A. ready for a meal of worm, sardine, or chunk of salmon, B. ready to poop, or C. all of the above at the same time. We find it best to accommodate Trevor outside his dirt hole. So we will harvest our bountiful and reasonably angry crop, spray him with some dechlorinated water to remove any dirt, and transport him elsewhere. And for Trevor, we bring out our finest china. Before we get any further, let's explain what he actually is. Trevor is a South American horned frog. Scientifically, he's a Ceratophrys cranbelli, from the Ceratophryidae family of anurans. More commonly, Trevor is what you would call a Pacman frog, to which several species of the Ceratophrys genus falls into. Now there are many kinds of Pacman frog. Some of them have horns, some of them don't. Some of them come in very cool colors, and morphs named like men's body spray. Samurai Blue, Inferno, Nebula Mutant. Generally though, all Pacman frogs are chunky, very rotund frogs with relatively huge mouths that take up nearly the whole front of their body. And they almost always have a dubious look on their face. Without the intervention of breeders, Pacman frogs are usually green with brown or red mottling. This wild-type morph is the most common type of Pacman frog you will encounter, especially in big retail pet stores should you want one. As you can see, Trevor is also a very round wild-type boy. He looks exactly like his ancestors. He's very approachable and only bites sometimes. Speaking of his ancestors, naturally occurring Pacman frogs live in the warm, humid regions of South America, particularly grasslands, forests, and areas with loose soil and leaf litter. Most of the time, they stay partially buried with only their eyes and mouth exposed. This helps them stay moist, avoid predators, and ambush prey without using much energy. You heard that right. This little boy right here is an ambush predator. He certainly looks like one, huh? He's all puffed up and very cranky right now because I've dug him out. So tough, very dangerous. Pacman frogs don't roam around for food. Instead, they rely on anything that wanders too close. Insects, small reptiles, other frogs, and even small mammals can all be on the menu. When prey gets too close, they rapidly open their gigantic mouths and swallow it whole. Pacman frog activity is closely tied to rainfall. During the wet seasons, they're more active, feeding and breeding in temporary pools formed by the rain. When conditions get too hot or too dry, they can enter a state similar to dormancy called estivation. They burrow deeper underground, reduce their respiration and metabolism, conserve their energy, and form a protective cocoon of shed skin that helps prevent water loss until the rain returns. Of course, pet Pacman frogs live a much more predictable and sheltered life. They don't ever have to experience seasonal extremes. Now, if you wanted one of these bad boys or girls, I'm going to now give you some information on how to best make them comfortable in your home. But please do note that there is a lot of good information online from people much smarter than I. These are simply my recommendations. I don't claim to be an expert, but I do claim to love this blob of a frog. Okay, first, you're going to need a 10 to 20 gallon enclosure. I'd recommend something on the larger end because while they don't seem like they move around a lot, I've definitely seen signs that Trevor has tromped around the entirety of his 20-gallon enclosure. Like plants that have been trampled and ornaments or hides that have definitely been pushed around. This is also why we don't have a lot of greenery in the tank at the moment. Trevor likes to disrespect his surroundings. Trevor will also most definitely disrespect anything else that might want to live in his enclosure. Pacman frogs are solitary and should always be housed individually. No matter how cute it could be to have multiple frogs, they'll eat their housemates given the opportunity, and that's not very nice. You're also going to need about 3 to 6 inches of substrate spread around the enclosure, with some areas that are deeper and other areas that are shallow. This is so that your frog can find the depth they prefer when bearing themselves. Coconut fiber is an excellent choice for substrate. This stuff usually comes in bricks or big bags. You could also add in a bit of sphagnum moss to help with moisture retention. You need to then mix this substrate very well with dechlorinated water so that it is damp but not super wet. For dechlorinating your tap water, you can use a commercial pet-safe dechlorination solution. Pacman frogs like a fair bit of humidity, somewhere around 70 to 80%. So get yourself a humidity gauge, they're sometimes called hygrometers, to help measure that out. Be sure to mist the enclosure every day with dechlorinated water, but again, you want everything damp but not completely soaked. Because too much water leads to mold growth and bacterial growth that can affect your frog's skin and respiratory system. But of course, too little water can dry out your frog and push them into estivation. In your enclosures, you should also leave a shallow bowl of dechlorinated water wide enough for the frog to soak in. Shallow because these frogs are terrestrial and quickly forget how to swim when they grow from tadpole to frog. Now on to temperature and light control. You'll need a heat source. Any combination of low wattage white incandescent bulbs, heating pads, or ceramic heat emitters. Make sure you consider the size of your enclosure when deciding the wattage or strength of your heating setup. You'll also need to designate a warm and cool region for your enclosure, so your frog can decide exactly how cooked it wants to be on a given day. Your temperatures during the day should be around 24 to 29 degrees Celsius and around 21 to 24 degrees Celsius during the night. Again, the cooler side can be several degrees colder. Get yourself an infrared temperature monitor or gun. This makes it a whole lot easier to check the temperature in specific spots in your enclosure. You can also use a smart timer setup with manual dimming switches to automatically manage climate settings. Oh, and one more thing about heat. I would advise against using a heating pad on the bottom of the tank. Pacman frogs frequently bury themselves all the way to the bottom, as deep as they can go. You can hear their little butts go squeak, 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 rubbing against the bottom glass. And they're too dumb, especially Trevor, to dig themselves out before their body temperatures rise to an unsafe level. Okay, so that's all for heat. For light, that same white incandescent bulb we talked about for heat will also usually be enough for light. If you didn't want a white incandescent bulb, you can instead consider a halogen flood bulb. Both these options are far dimmer than sunlight, and this is a good thing. Because Pacman frogs don't particularly long for the scorching radiance of the sun, especially the albino morphs that are extra sensitive to light. You might also want to consider UVB light for your frog. UVB light allows animals to make vitamin D3 in their skin. This in turn allows them to use any calcium provided in the diet. There is also some research pointing towards UVB benefits to immunity. So a low-level 2.0 or 5.0 UVB bulb active across your daylight hours to imitate the natural sunlight is a great start. And that is pretty much all you need to get a Pacman frog enclosure started. Once you and your frog have settled, make sure you unsettle your frog at least once a month to remove and change their dirt, as well as disinfect their tank and water dish with a habitat-friendly cleaning solution. Another thing that's worth mentioning is if you are handling a Pacman frog, handle them only for a very short time. If you have gloves, that's great. If not, make sure you have clean hands that have little to no trace of the detergent you use to wash them with. Pacman frogs can breathe through their skin, and whatever chemicals or oils that are on your hand can transfer very easily onto them, and that's no good. With stable heat, humidity, and water, most pet Pacman frogs never need to estivate. As a result, they're active year-round. But if you live somewhere where you have to deal with winter, then you might have some trouble providing consistent heat for your frog, because some days might just be really cold, or you might just happen to move across the country in the middle of winter. If this happens, a Pacman frog might do something called brumation. This is normal winter dormancy, usually seen in reptiles with similar effects to estivation. If your frog does go into brumation, you'll find that your Pacman frog will refuse to eat even if you dig them up. But it's no biggie, don't be alarmed, just let the temperature stabilize and they'll go back to being hungry. Pacman frogs can be fed nearly anything that they can fit their mouth around. Nightcrawler earthworms, hornworms, silkworms, crickets, roaches where legal, and even fish and small rodents. With fish, I would stay away from live fish like guppies, mollies, platies, mostly because live fish are yet another avenue to introduce potentially dangerous microbes to your delicate, handsome, beautiful, perfect little frog. If you do want to try fish though, try frozen silversides that can be thawed out in a few minutes before feeding it to your frog. Now you can feed your Pacman frog mealworms, superworms, waxworms, and butterworms, but these tend to be very high in fat and should be seen as treats that you feed your frog once in a while. Things you should not try to feed your frog would be red wiggler earthworms that produce a coelomic fluid that your Pacman will most likely find very unpleasant. Also, don't feed them goldfish, minnows or white suckers because these fish are high in thiominase, which is an enzyme that breaks down thiamine or vitamin B1, which is very important in converting food into energy. It also helps with nerve function as well as heart and muscle health. Okay, so you also want to be supplementing your Pacman frog's diet with calcium and multivitamins designed for amphibians. These usually come in the form of powders that you can dust the food item with before offering it to your frog. And this offering food to your frog was a really neat and confusing process for me, because Trevor is what you would call special. When you feed a Pacman frog, you generally use feeding tongs to present the food item to the frog. Sometimes you may gently rub the food item on the frog's snout, at which point the frog will chomp. But Trevor sometimes takes forever. When I first started feeding him, I would rub this earthworm all over his face, but he will not care. And I'd panic because it's been a month since he last ate. But the thing is, he is an ambush predator. He eats when he wants to. He eats when he's ready. I am not the boss. So don't feel bad or scared if they don't bite on the first go. When they feel more comfortable and when they're ready, they will definitely chomp. And also remember, very important, only use tongs to feed your frog, because they will bite. And that bite will draw blood. Despite their sweet, goofy faces, Pacman frogs can chomp down with up to 6.6 pounds of force. That might not sound like much, but believe me, it is extremely sufficient when concentrated on their needle-like teeth and the sharp, bony projections on their lower jaw called odontoids. Appetites can also vary based on whether a Pacman frog is a Ceratophrys ornata or a Cranwelli. Ornates grow much bigger than the Cranwellis and have a bigger appetite to match. On the other hand, Cranwelli appetites peter out as they get older, especially in the males, which end up being much smaller than the ladies. You can feed froglets every day or every other day, while adult frogs only need a meal about every 7 to 10 days. As your frog gets older, feed less often but provide larger meals. A good rule of thumb is to let your frog eat as much as it wants within the first 10 to 15 minutes, which helps prevent overeating and helps your frog avoid contracting chunky monkeyitis. Over time, your Pacman frog may also develop a strong preference for a few food items, like Trevor, who only enjoys slurping up night crawlers. This is okay. I get it, we all have hyperfixation meals. Just consider supplementing their diet if this happens. Something else that might happen as you are feeding a Pacman frog is the birth of an incredibly smelly, absolutely gigantic turd. I mean, look at this thing. It's not even fully out. I'll speed it up for you. Trevor doesn't poop often, but when he does, it's the most unpleasant treat. Oh well, at least he's not constipated. You might have noticed his flat schnoz. This is his signature look, but normal Pacman snouts look more sloped and rounded. A flat snout is a telltale sign of either poor breeding or metabolic bone disease. I'm inclined to believe that Trevor's nose is due to the former. Trevor has always had a flat snout and has otherwise been very healthy. But he is the product of a ridiculous number of generations. Even the most skilled breeders will run into overbreeding at some point simply due to how a frog reproduces. So it isn't rare that many froglets in a generation come out with some defect or other if they survive at all. We are very lucky that Trevor's defect makes him look quite charming. Metabolic bone disease, or MBD for short, is not charming at all. It is a common and very serious health problem in captive reptiles and amphibians. MBD is usually caused by an imbalance in calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D3, or again, poor husbandry. So we're talking diets low in calcium or too high in phosphorus that lack vitamin D3 with no access to proper UVB light. When calcium levels are too low, the body pulls calcium from the bones to keep vital organs working. Over time, bones become soft, weak, and misshapen, and in extreme cases, muscles and nerves stop functioning properly. So it's always a good idea to occasionally pick your frog up and see if their jaw or skull feels a little squishy when gently touched. Check if they're developing bowed legs or uneven posture, or seem to be less responsive, or seem to be avoiding movement altogether. If your frog shows any of these signs, off to the vet you go to mitigate some of the damage. Another common disease observed in Pacman frogs is red leg. This is a very serious, often fast-moving bacterial infection caused by poor cleanliness of the enclosure, coupled with injury or stress. The actual bacterium is often already present in the environment and there's not much we can do about it. But what's more important is making sure your frog is not compromised. Remember how I said Pacman frogs like to burrow all the way down? Well, when they get to the bottom, hit glass and still feel like they need to go deeper, they'll keep trying to dig. And the friction between the skin and the glass over time can cause enough irritation to let the bacteria in. So make sure you don't skimp out on the substrate. Another common source of injury is sharp decorations. Pacman frogs do not care about decorations really. So if you are putting anything aesthetic in the enclosure, make sure it's something that's not pointy or sharp, or something that looks unintentionally appetizing. If you find your frog is getting red or pink discoloration or sores on the legs, belly, or underside, or swollen limbs and showing loss of appetite, take the poor thing to the vet. This is all scary, I know. But if you take good care of your frog's diet and enclosure, most health-related issues can be avoided. Now, before I go, I want to tell you one more thing about Trevor. You've heard me referring to Trevor as a boy, but you might be wondering how exactly does one find out the sex of a frog? With Pacman frogs, you need to wait at least half a year, after which you can look for nuptial pads. These are dark, sometimes spiny areas on the thumbs or forelimbs of male frogs that develop during the breeding season to help them grip females during mating. Or you can wait and see if your little frog starts to sing, which is far more exciting. If it's a male, they'll make repeated high-pitched trills or chirps every now and then. Trevor makes them occasionally to lure in the females while being completely buried, as one does when they're trying to attract a woman. Female frogs also vocalize, but less frequently, and make more of a croaking or grunting noise. Also beautiful. And that, my friends, is where we leave Trevor the Pacman frog. Back into his enclosure he goes. A special thank you to all the Pacman enthusiasts, researchers, and ethical breeders for this wonderful opportunity to have this frog live a healthy life in my house. And thank you all for watching this very special episode. Please tell me if you guys have frogs or toads that live in your house rent-free. And if you're just out there, having fallen hopelessly in love with Trevor, please like and subscribe. I wish you all an incredible year ahead. I'll see you again soon. Peace.